A very good evening to everyone in attendance today. International Council for Circular Economy welcomes you to the 8th episode of the 3rd season of our Circular Chat, focused on the biggest challenge we as a global community face today, climate change. The Circular Chat is an initiative by ICCE to develop and promote the idea of a circular economy. The chats aim to engage key actors to mobilize system solutions at scale, and in that regard, we wish to bring to you the opinions and immense knowledge of leading experts in the field of climate change in the various facets it covers. My name is Anagha, and it's my honor to introduce our guest speaker for the day, Mr. Shailendra Singh Rao, to give his views on the topic Carbon Credits, a way to curb climate change. Mr. Shailendra holds an English Honours degree and MA in Public Administration from Mohanlal Sukhadia University and an MBA Marketing, Human Resources and Technology from the Indian Institute of Planning and Management. He has been a serial entrepreneur and an investor, with both his previous startups gaining large traction. For his efforts, he has been awarded with several honors, including being in the Forbes 100 notable under 40 entrepreneurs in India. Mr. Shailendra is the founder and director of CREDUCE, a company which is committed to providing the highest possible standard of service in the climate change mitigation and carbon markets. It is wonderful to have you with us today, Mr. Shailendra.
Thank you so much, Anara, for having me here. And it was really a pleasure when I got an invitation from ICCE about the topic and to be the guest speaker. It really excited me, and I was looking forward to it. And finally, the day has arrived when we are here and we are being face to face with the public and sharing the thoughts. So thank you a lot for providing this opportunity. Yeah.
Yes, so we're extremely thrilled to have you here with us. So to begin with, could you briefly explain to us what carbon credits are and how does it incentivize sustainable change?
See, Anaga, when we talk about carbon credits is basically it's a unit that in total you can consider it as it's a virtual currency or it's a virtual commodity. Carbon credit is a unit which is equivalent to 1 ton of carbon emission reductions or replacement directly from the environment. Carbon credit was, if you trace back the history of carbon credits, initially under the clean development mechanism of United Nations, this particular unit were launched, and for any project activity or for any act of companies or any act of or any source of energy, environment or climate change mitigation activity which is helping in the benefit of the environment and which is helping in replacement of 1 ton of greenhouse gas emission equivalent. These units were started as a reward to those activity holders, and in turn later on these units were converted as a a mean to exchange. You can exchange these units against the monetary value, and by and large, with the virtue of the fact of the mechanism, these units started getting traded in the market between the buyers and the sellers community. Now, if we go about the buyer-seller community, the buyer community is the Annex 1 countries or the large enterprises who have the climate change mitigation targets or greenhouse gas reduction targets, whereas the seller community is any party or any activity or majorly non-Annex countries which are helping in mitigation of greenhouse gases. They used to claim, or they are claiming, carbon credit in exchange of the tons of replacement of GHG emission reductions. And they are selling these credits to the buyer side, and buyers are giving them the money. So as a whole, the carbon credit practice, we can consider it as a virtual currency, or we can consider it as a virtual commodity, which is getting traded in exchange of money, and which is getting claimed against the emission reduction or greenhouse gas emission abatement or replacement which they are making.
Understood, sir. So the explanation was extremely simple, so I'm sure our audiences understood that as well. But from our understanding, there are 2 types of carbon credits. Now, how are they different from each other, and what different ways do they enable a positive action for climate change?
All right. So when we speak about types of carbon credits, basically there are 2 types of carbon credits, but we need to first understand from which mechanism these credits are being derived. So there are 2 kinds of market, or 2 kinds of market mechanism primarily in the market. One is compliance market and another one is voluntary market mechanism. So both mechanisms have a different set of buyers and different set of practices in the market. It is like comparing iPhone with Android. they both solve the same purpose, that is the communication, and that is getting in touch with each other. But they both run on the different set of systems, right? So similarly, if we compare voluntary market and compliance market, they both are generating carbon credits. They both, more or less, they both have the similar basics and similar methodologies and mechanisms, to be precise. But the serving the purpose, one has a limited set of buyers and limited set of creators, whereas the another has broad set of buyers and broad set of creators. Compliance market has its own limitations, its own limited buyers, whereas voluntary market is more broader, much larger. It has more number of participants, and from both buyer and seller side, and both markets are getting traded at a decent price in recent conditions in the market, but both are serving different purposes. The earlier one is majorly, if we look at the compliance market carbon credits are getting served, getting bought by the countries, developed countries, which have the targets set by United Nations under Kyoto Protocol. And these countries, in order to meet their targets, they are buying these compliance market credits, and they are meeting their targets. Whereas voluntary market credits are majorly bought by the buyers who are taking climate change mitigation activity as a voluntary action, who have given their own determined contributions in the abatement of climate change. And in order to meet their own self-proclaimed voluntary targets, or to convert themselves in the net zero company or net zero organization, they are buying voluntary carbon credits and getting them offsetted against the emissions done by them. So both credits are available in the market, compliance and voluntary, but serving different purposes. But the goal is same, that is the climate change abatement or mitigation.
Okay. So carbon credits is essentially a more, effective alternative to carbon tax, right? Because it is a part of the cap and trade program. Now, can you maybe shed some light about this particular policy and why it's deemed better than just normal taxation?
See, when we compare carbon credits and carbon tax, see, carbon tax is basically, it is imposed by governments to the industries who are the large emitters or large energy intensive industry who are contributing more in the climate change. So to cut down, or to bring them in a trajectory of lower contribution into the climate change, or to penalize them, carbon tax is launched by different countries to them, so that they keep their carbon emissions to a certain level, wherein if they are going beyond that level in emitting in the environment, they'll be penalized in terms of carbon tax. But the carbon tax is basically, if we look at the certainty of it, carbon tax is a fixed price, which an organization is set to pay or ready to pay to the government in exchange of their excess carbon emissions. But sometimes carbon tax levels are so high that it becomes it doesn't become affordable for these companies to pay such heavy taxes to their respective governments. For example, recently you may have heard of Singapore. Singapore has raised its per ton of carbon emission, excess reduction of per ton of carbon emission reduction. They have imposed a penalty of $25. Right, so that's an additional levy which government will charge from the industries who are doing emission in excess. So these carbon taxes are sometimes so high that it becomes viable for companies to buy carbon credits in exchange of their excess emission and getting it offsetted rather than paying the taxes to governments. And whereas if we look at the cap and trade program or cap and trade systems like carbon credit mechanism, setting an emission reduction targets for these companies becomes easier. It helps them, making more proactive in their environment, this climate change abatement exercises, and it becomes more easier for them to set their own targets and to plan their own finances, that okay, against this much of excess emission, how much we are going to save and how much we are going to procure from the market against our excess emission, and then we are going to offset. Cap and trade program basically gives more opportunity for both buyers as well as sellers Now, buyers are those who are doing excess emission. It gives them opportunity to plan their finances, to procure the credits from the market. And for sellers, it also gives them an opportunity to play a pivotal role in the economic betterment of that particular country. So cap and trade gives the leverage into a vicious cycle of sustainable development and economical development of both buyer and seller side, whereas carbon tax is more of a penalizing activity rather than promoting activity, or rather than giving a boost to the industry or the uh, participants, so whosoever is taking part into that activity.
Okay, so now when we talk about carbon credits, we're talking about it to be beneficial for both buyers and sellers globally, right? But it is often assumed that in order for an emission trading system to work, all parties involved must be granted or accept a strict cap on their emissions. But this would not work in the global system because it's mostly occupied by developing nations. So how does the carbon credit system incentivize developing nations' participation as well? And if so, do you have any recommendations to make the system, let's say, more effective?
See, as I talked earlier, that if we look at the basics of carbon credit or background of carbon credits, why this system was launched earlier, and when the carbon credits mechanism were launched, it was pre-decided that this entire activity is going to be a vicious cycle. It will help developing nations in planning their emission reduction activities, whereas it will help developed nations in planning their emission reduction activities and to meet their targets. Whereas it was also decided that this mechanism will help developing nations in meeting their financing demands. Right. So carbon credit is mean to provide carbon finance to developing nations. Right. When we talk about the mechanism to achieve their own targets, developed countries are supposed to, or governments and the industries situated in developed countries, they are supposed to buy carbon credits from the developing nations. So the mechanism has already been helping somehow. There was a crash in the market in the past years, but the situations have drastically improved recently. So the mechanism has already been flowing, helping in funds flow from developed nations to the developing nations. The funds were coming, and using that funds, the developing nation participants were already developing project activities which are eligible to get carbon credits, and they were enjoying the economic benefit. So the vicious cycle was already being met, but it is not at par with what actually it has to be. When the mechanism was launched, there were very few players, and there were few more methodologies and few more project types which were made eligible, and then so on and so forth. Today, a majority of sectors have already been involved, which are eligible to claim carbon credits and gain the monetary benefit out of it. But here, when we talk about sustainable development or a vicious cycle of sustainable development, the clean development mechanism, the benefit of this entire mechanism, or the benefit of entire carbon credit mechanism, should reach to the grassroots person or at the grassroots level. There is still a lot to be done. The indigenous people or the grassroots level people, most of the people which are getting benefited by carbon credits trade system, they are the large corporations or large industries. They are only setting up such renewable energy plants or other activities and claiming carbon credits and getting monetary benefit out of it. But what about the indigenous people or grassroots level people who were the actual stakeholders of this entire mechanism? They should get benefited first, and then the industries come. Right. So now people are, industries and governments have also realized this. And that is why there have been quite a few changes in the policies and procedures, and more funds have been launched, which are targeted specifically towards activities which are benefiting the grassroots level, like community development programs are there, cook stove programs are there, nature-based solutions programs, which are helping, like bamboo-based economy program. There are programs and policies which are focusing at grassroots level people, that the end person in the value chain should get benefited from this. So things are being worked out, and we see a very brighter future when we talk about the grassroots person getting benefited from the carbon credits. If you were to ask my recommendation, or if I have to give any recommendation, there has to be there are several changes which needs to be announced, and there should be policy framework. A concrete policy framework has to be there at the government levels in the countries which are actually making the grassroots person or the indigenous person as a part of the value chain, as a mainstream part of the value chain, and he should be the front runner in getting the benefits. So these are policy driven exercises which governments should better know. This has to be there. Secondly, one more thing which I see which can be done is the fixed price mechanism. There should be I've been a very strong advocate of fixed price mechanism in the carbon market. So as you know, everyone who is taking part in the entire exercise should know that this is the minimum guaranteed benefit which I'm going to get from this activity, and this is the chunk which is going to the actual stakeholder in the entire exercise. That has to be there, and that would be my best recommendation on this.
Okay, so adding to that only, I had another question, because oftentimes, like you mentioned, the lack of transparency keeps new actors from entering the market, and like subsequent situations or circumstances that are caused because of it make many players leave as well. So is there a standardized way to calculate and look into the compensation part of carbon credits already? And if not, do you have any recommendations or methods that could help that part of the carbon credit system?
Can you again repeat the question, please?
Yes, sir. So basically, because of the lack of transparency that exists in the market, a lot of new players are afraid of entering it, and a lot of people do leave the market as well. So is there a standardized way to make sure that the compensation that happens in the carbon credit system is calculated? Is there already a means that this is calculated, or is there something that you would recommend be installed into the market system so that these scandals or circumstances do not occur, and people can be incentivized to join the carbon credit system?
See, if we look at the carbon markets as a whole, carbon credits, the entire system and the entire mechanism is quite transparent already. When it was started with the United Nations had already made such strict and robust policies. Any carbon credit project which is right from the ideation to inception to launch and to getting it registered and then final trade, the project has to go through several steps, and at each and every step which the project is meeting, there are strict and there are very strictly imposed criteria which a project activity has to meet. Every carbon credit project activity has to be real. It has to be additional real. I mean, with real is the project activity has to actually exist in the market or on the earth where it was being claimed. It has to be additional. The project activity has to be financially additional, that without claiming carbon credit benefit, this project activity will not survive, or it will not be sustainable enough for the project owner. The project activity has to be verified. Every project which intends to get carbon credit, it has to be verified by the third party auditors, which are appointed by the relevant registries where the project is going to get registered, right? So it has to be verified. After that, once the verification or the validation of that project activity is done, when you have received these credits, and when you are proposing these credits to be sold in the market, the buyers are also choosy. They pick the credits which actually serves their purpose, right? So the activities are quite transparent. You can't get carbon credits just like this, that okay, this is the project, we are giving you the carbon credits, lay low. So it doesn't happen like that. The project activity has to pass through all the challenging tasks finally to get the registration and to achieve the carbon credit. When we talk about standardized way of calculation of carbon credit, yes, there are standardized methodologies available into the both compliance and voluntary registries and the markets. So any activity which has to become eligible to claim the carbon credit, first, the due diligence of that particular project is done based on the methodology, in which methodology this activity will fall in, what will be the way of the calculation, how the number of credits will be calculated to that particular project activity. That's how all these exercises are done, and then the project activity actually gets an initiation in the registration and validation processes. So the ways and means are already available to prove that the carbon credit mechanisms are quite transparent. Now, so far, your next, which you were asking, was compensation part of carbon credit. See, when compensation occurs, it is mostly a bilateral transaction. There is no fixed manner, or there is no fixed price at what price the carbon credit will get traded, right? So in bilateral transactions, it is between the buyer and the seller at what price they are getting agreed to sell, and at whatever price they are agreeing, the seller is getting its agreed price and the buyer is getting carbon credits at an agreed price. So there is no lack, or there is no loophole in the transaction processes of carbon credits. There have been some instances in past, and those who did such activities, they were penalized in a very big manner. So carbon credit is one of the most transparent way of earning from the investor point of view, and it is the most transparent way of offsetting our own carbon emissions from the buyer's point of view. So the activity is already transparent.
That is very good to hear, sir. Those are all the questions from my side, but I do see a lot of questions in the live chat, so I was hoping you could take some of them up. So the first question is from Kishore Kavadia. He says, he asks, can you also inform of the mechanisms of carbon credits generated under Indian context and sell to, say, Singapore? Who will prove the carbon credit generated?
Good. Can you also inform the mechanism of credits generated under Indian context and sell to, say, Singapore? Who will prove this C credit? Okay, so ultimately, when you wish to generate the carbon credits, you can mostly go for voluntary market in the current scenario. You can opt for a voluntary carbon mechanism, and you can get your project registered and then sell it to whichever, because there are no new registrations in the compliance market happening these days. So you can go for voluntary market registration and get your credits sold to any country you want. So
Yes.
Provided your project activity is eligible to get the carbon credit registration, what is the type and size of the activity? Based on that, you can decide which mechanism to go for.
Yes, so the next question is by some portion towards sustainability. So it says, how can social enterprises working on climate mitigation and climate adaptation make this work for them?
Definitely, it is a great mean to earn funds for such social enterprises, but it depends on what kind of activities they are working on. Like what is the means of their project activity, be it they are working in the area of lifestyle upliftment of the poor. So what is the source of that lifestyle upliftment? Community development program, are they distributing some free cook stoves into the community, and large scale programs they are running, which is actually benefiting the society or the grassroots level people? They have to identify such projects first based on the available methodologies with the markets, and they can get their project registered and gain the benefits out of it.
Yes, sir. There's another question. It's by Anthony Pulikin. He says, can you touch up on carbon capture and how each organization can get carbon credit for carbon capture? How is it measured, and who verifies it, and who verifies the verifier?
See, carbon capture technology, there have been some proven technologies already available. It is purely technical. We need to look at the technology first and then look at the methodology. You have to identify what kind of carbon capture activity they are doing. Are they doing direct methane capture? Are they doing direct emission capture, which is which is happening through the chimneys in the industries? So what kind of project? What is the nature of project? that we'll have to see first, look into the technology, and then we'll have to do a proper due diligence as per the methodologies available. If there is an existing methodology in the market, you can select that project as an eligible project. You can start developing the project. Now, when you are talking about Mr. Anthony is asking about who verifies the verifiers, then see, definitely whichever registry you are getting you are intending to register your project with, that registry has already approved the set of verifiers and the validators, right? So basically it is the registry who will decide that who are the verifiers, and you'll have to choose and pick one out of the set of registered verifiers with the registry. So registry is the verifier of verifiers, or the approver of verifiers.
Yes, sir. There are two more questions. I'll just combine the two. So one of them is, which UN body, Indian government or state government bodies are part of the carbon credits market? And the second one is, when you mentioned, said UN bodies, are they working as per the CDM methodology?
Which UN body, Indian government, state government bodies are part of these carbon markets? Okay, so when we talk about UN body, definitely UNFCCC, United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. That is the prime body across the world, which is, there are 195 ratified countries which have ratified the UNFCCC. And UNFCCC is the prime body which is governing the compliance market. If we talk about Indian bodies, then definitely every country has their respective host country. Every country is a host party, and there are specific departments who are acting as the host party for the United Nations. If we talk about India, Ministry of Environment and Forest earlier under the Kyoto Protocol, MOEF was the host party for Indian projects. So any project which intends to get the CDM, take part in CDM, Clean Development Mechanism, it has to get the host country approval first for their project, and then only the project can go to the later stages for the submission with CDM under United Nations. And so far state governments are concerned, to take part in carbon credits, you don't need to take approval from any specific state government department. You can directly develop your project to get it approved from your host country entity, which is called also DNA, your DNA, designated national authority. So you can get your project approved from your DNA and then get it registered.
Yes, sir. Due to the paucity of time, these is all the questions that we'll be able to take up for today. But all the questions are being noted down, and we will take up in the next session, which is similar to the session that we've taken today. So
I would also like to urge all the viewers or listeners who have taken part in the chat. If you have any specific queries or questions, I'll be free to answer all the questions, and I'll be free to reply all the questions. You can definitely access my profiles or have a look at our website and send your questions through email to us, and we'll be definitely happy to answer all the queries which are raised by you.
Thank you, Mr. Shailendra. That's a great initiative that you're taking up as well. So thank you for being here with us today. I would also like to thank everyone who decided to join our live session today, because we will be back at the same time next week with a similar topic as well. So please do join us there. And if you don't want to miss out on any updates or future conversations, do follow our social media pages and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Once again, thank you so much, and see you next week at the Circular Chat.
Thank you so much.